we pick up bits of information and parrot that information. I'm speaking in a general sense, of course. We parrot that information as opposed to thinking deeply. And part of that is the staccato nature of our culture. I mean, we're getting information at such a rapid pace that we never really get a chance to digest it. I mean, I watch television shows all the time. The interviews are increasingly short. You're coming up to a station break, and then you're on to something else. And because of that rapid fire, people don't get a chance to really think or ponder these very significant issues. So what do you do about that? What do you do as you are working to teach your children or other people? How do you teach them to actually process information, to think deeply about things in an age in which we are being bombarded with information but not really processing it?
That's a great question. It's something that I think about a lot. I was reflecting the other day on the fact that the public school system no longer, if it ever did require, I'm assuming at one time that it did, but at least now they do not require someone to master basic logic before they graduate from high school, which is a tragedy. And that's at the root of a lot of our problem today, I think. But in answer to your question about how do we raise our kids to overcome this ill of society, we have to, well, number one, make sure they're well-versed in the art of critical thinking. And the best way to do that is to teach them what I call the virtue of inquisitiveness. So make sure that when they hear a truth claim, they know to ask, first of all, well, what do you mean by, and restate the truth claim. And the very next question should be, how do you know that to be true? What evidence do you have for that, or what led you to that conclusion? And I have to give credit to my colleague, Mary Jo Sharp, for an excellent study she wrote on this a few years ago. And it's basically an entire book on how to properly question claims of other worldviews. And I think if we can equip our children to just do those basic things, it's a total win, and that they're going to be so much better prepared to face this bombardment of information from the internet and television as they go on through their lives.
Okay, so I think what you just said is so incredibly important, it needs to be repeated. In other words, I think you need to restate what you just said, because people should park on that as they listen to this podcast.
Okay. So I would say the first step is to make sure your children understand the basic rules of critical thinking, very basic logic. It isn't hard to equip them with that. There are some excellent resources out there to help you. But the second thing is to teach them the virtue of inquisitiveness. When they are faced with a truth claim, they need to be prepared to, first of all, ask the person making the truth claim, what do you mean by that? Okay, explain your claim more fully to me, and then teach your child that what they always need to do at that point is repeat it back, make sure they are understanding the claim being made. But then the very next question needs to be, why do you believe that to be true, or how did you arrive at that conclusion? So show me some evidence, or at least trace for me the path of reasoning that led you to conclude that the claim you're making is true. And it will amaze you how many times the large majority of cases in which the person making the truth claim cannot state a reason for why they believe it to be true. And as I said before, I think that's a huge win right there for someone facing a claim that conflicts with the Christian worldview.
So for those of you listening into the podcast, you want to go back and listen to what Melissa has just said a couple of times, and really get that into your head, because I think this is a blueprint for success with your children in an age of information overload. One of the things perhaps in this line of thinking has to do with the late Stephen Hawking, who seems resolutely committed to the notion that philosophy is dead, and as such, questions about the nature of ultimate reality have been ceded to science. Now, that's a claim, and that claim, I think, has to be examined very, very carefully.
Yes. The irony behind it is when he makes the claim that philosophy is dead, that now science is the torchbearer in the path to discovery of what is real, he's making a fundamentally philosophical claim. Unfortunately for the person who ascribes to the worldview of scientism, they're stuck because science is it's moderated and it's defined and guided by philosophical rules and philosophical ideas. And so we can't get away from it. You can't even make any sort of argument using scientific evidence, an argument for a theory, for example, without using the laws of logic. So it's just an inescapable fact. And it's unfortunate that great minds like Hawking just fall prey to this idea of scientism, that science tells us everything we need to know, that it's the only elucidator of truth.
So here's a classic example of what you said. Here you have someone making a dogmatic assertion, but it's not a defensible argument. You spend a little time thinking about the premise of his statement, and you immediately realize that it itself is dead. It simply does not hold any water.
Right, exactly.
Why is it, in your estimation, Melissa, that post-Darwin, you have scientists who no longer seem to be able to grasp what the ancients did? You mentioned some of them. That if there is mathematical orderliness within the universe, then it stands to reason that this is best accounted for what you called earlier the maker thesis.
You know, I think we hit on it pretty well earlier when we were talking about philosophical presuppositions. It's really interesting to me to read the counter-arguments in the materialist literature against the types of ideas I talk about in my book concerning the mathematical rationality of the cosmos. But on the flip side of that, not just Thomas Nagel, but scientists such as Roger Penrose and Max Tegmark have made the admission that we are looking at a fundamentally mathematical universe, and this cries out for explanation. But again, they're locked into their philosophical pre-commitments, and they are not willing to entertain the idea of the existence of God. So it's just a very interesting dynamic. And again, I just have to say, in my estimation, it always boils down to those philosophical pre-commitments.
You know, I love hearing what you have to say. I think about, again, as I mentioned earlier, and my audience well knows I'm the father of 12 children, and those children, when they went to school, we happened to put them all through a Christian school. In fact, I was just at our youngest child, 8th grade graduation, just before I came in to do the podcast. And they have been in a very favorable situation because when they have questions, they know that they have someone to come back and ask those questions to, as opposed to those questions throwing them or drawing them away from the Christian worldview. And in that sense, I want you to maybe expand on how important the discipline that you're involved in with Nancy and Holly and the rest, how important this discipline really is, how important it is for mothers, not just fathers, but maybe even particularly mothers to have a grasp on basic apologetics, because this is the inoculation process against what their children are going to face in school and in the workplace.
Well, I think that all of the women out there listening who are mothers themselves already know that it is typically the case that we spend more time with our children than any other person does while they are in their formative years, before they get their driver's license and start spending all that extra time with their friends, or they graduate high school and go off to college. So we have them from birth as this captive audience, this little sponge that just absorbs so much from our words and from observing our actions. And because we're the ones that they're around most of the time, we happen to be there when these big, hard questions occur to them, or when they hear a big, hard question from a peer at school, or when they hear a claim made against Christianity in a television show, or when they see someone make a statement on social media that goes against a core Christian truth claim. And so we have this golden opportunity to do conversational learning with our kids. And through having these conversations and not going into panic mode, we can show them that our faith is reasonable, our faith is credible, that we have great answers to the challenges that are often hurled at Christianity from secularists in our society today. So we serve as this educator, whether our children are educated at home or in a conventional school or what have you, we are educating them from birth on how to view the world. And part of their instruction on how to view the world is how to understand themselves in the context of the core Christian truth claims and in the context of broader society. So they're learning all those things from us. And not to say that dads aren't key teachers too, but as I said before, the case is usually that the mom is around the children for the majority of the day during their formative years. So we just have a really special opportunity to raise up warriors for the kingdom.
But you have to make time for that. And as you've pointed out somewhere, I remember reading about you talking about, I think it was in your Motherhood and the Life of the Mind article in the Christian Research Journal, that you can take a half hour that you might be watching television, or you can take the time in which you're driving your child to school and use that time efficaciously for the purpose that you just outlined.
Oh, absolutely. I often have moms say, well, I need to do some preparation before I answer these hard questions, and I just don't have time to sit down and read stacks of books, which I totally get. And I explain to them, look, you have to fold laundry, you have to cook dinner, you have to drive your kids to school and then drive yourself back home, or then drive yourself to your job or what have you. Take advantage of those windows of time to listen to excellent podcasts, to listen to excellent audiobooks, and just gradually start building your knowledge base and start with the basics. And you'd be really surprised at how much progress you can make by just using those snippets of time in your regular daily routine to better prepare yourself. And I love it when I hear moms come back and say to me, you were totally right. I was able to listen to this audiobook on this day while I was cooking dinner. And wouldn't you know, 2 weeks later, my 7th grader asked me a question and I knew how to answer it. So I like to say, look, let the Holy Spirit be your guide as you're learning, and you will discover that there is a purpose behind it sooner or later. And that has always been true with me and the kinds of questions my kids have come up with, and I've watched it happen over and over again in the lives of families in my community with whom I've interacted. So
I think Melissa, I think what you're saying is it's not a matter of time, it's a matter of priority. I mean, we all have time to eat, we have time to sleep, we have time to get involved in our, in our favorite pastimes. It's not a matter of time, it's a matter of priority.